Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone. Well, about a week or so back, I reviewed the movie Guardians of the Galaxy 2 and I explained exactly why I found the film to be disappointing and just nowhere near as enjoyable as the second, and even for a sequel, why I thought that it had done certain things that had really let the whole Guardians of the Galaxy property down. Now, obviously, that attracted a bit of criticism, particularly from people who really love the film and those who are pretty committed devotees of the whole Marvel franchise and anything that the MCU does in particular. And so I thought today what I would do is I would make a video explaining how I think this movie could have been better. I guess it's a bit of a follow-up defense to my last detailed review. And in this one, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to be proactive rather than just reactive. I'm not just being negative and saying, here's what I didn't like about this particular movie. In today's review, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, here's how I think they could have got it better. And my hope is that by the end of this review, all of you who have hung on to the very end will have realised, in actual fact, I think he's right. There were things that could have been done better. Even if you don't agree with me about everything, my hope is that at the end of this video today, you'll think, yeah, I think that might have been a slightly better version of Guardians of the Galaxy 2 than the one we actually ended up seeing in the movie theatres. And I should start by saying this one important caveat. I am not actually a screenwriter. I've never written a screenplay, a movie script or anything of the like before. So I'm just a guy who's coming at this as an amateur movie buff who loves films, who loves a good story, and who's passionate about seeing good stories told well, particularly in cinema. And also that what that means is that in today's video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to unpack what I think the screenplay should have been, my version of it. It's really the broad brushstrokes. I'm not going to go into lots and lots and lots of minute little details. I'm going to give you the broad brushstroke of how I think this particular movie should have played out from start to finish. Also, obviously, there's going to be spoilers because I'm going to be referencing back the existing Guardians of the Galaxy 2. So if you haven't seen it and you don't want spoilers, you might want to go and watch it first and then come and watch this video. And also, in today's video, I'm going to be looking at a script on the screen a little bit. So if you see me looking off into the distance, I am looking at a screen just to sort of narrate back. And I'm going to try and interdisperse that with lots of images, graphic images, to sort of help break up the monotony a little bit as we go through what I think should have been the real script, the real movie version that was put to screen of Guardians of the Galaxy 2. So let's get into it. So my version of Guardians of the Galaxy 2 would not start with the battle where they were defending the Anulax batteries for the Sovereigns. Instead, it would start before that. It would start in the room where they had the negotiations with the Sovereigns. You know, those people who were golden painted people who looked a little bit like and acted a little bit like a whole lot of humanoid versions of C-3PO. And basically what happens is the film starts with them negotiating in the Sovereign throne room, and the Sovereigns tell them that they were recommended the Guardians of the Galaxy by someone else. Someone else has told them that they should use the Guardians of the Galaxy to protect themselves against this monster that wants to destroy their batteries. And while they're having the negotiations, Rocket offends the Sovereigns. That's when he actually creates offence, and he says out loud that what he wants to do is basically steal the batteries because they're so valuable. He makes a joke or an offhanded quip, and it doesn't go down so well, and basically everyone thinks that they're not sure whether to take him jokingly or whether he's serious, and he sort of says, look, I was only joking, I'm not going to do it. They go from there and they fight and they kill the beast, just like we saw in the current version of the film. However, there would be none of the drawn-out dancing Baby Groot stuff. Maybe there'd be a bit of dancing Baby Groot, but it wouldn't be a long, drawn-out battle. Part of the problem with the first film is that opening battle sequence, there's no dramatic tension because we don't know anything about the story, we don't know anything about this beast, we don't know enough to be dramatically and emotionally invested in this battle scene, and so when you draw it out, it just feels long and drawn out, so it wouldn't be like that. And I also wouldn't be having things like the whole Drax stopping to look at Baby Groot and Baby Groot freezing. I mean, that was funny in the first film because obviously Drax was cleaning his knife and he was being distracted, and you sort of get the sense with his character he would have been really frustrated by something like that. But to do it again in this movie just felt like really pointless and poorly thought out fan service. It didn't make sense that he would be doing that in the middle of the battle. So there wouldn't be any of that sort of cheesy stuff. I'd try and keep the jokes and the humour in there, but it would be more streamlined and a lot more focused. Anyway, so they defeat this beast. And what happens is they go back into the sovereign throne room and they negotiate payment. And for a second time, Rocket offends someone, and this time it's worse. How he offends them is worse than what it was when they were negotiating beforehand. And it turns out that the sovereigns have some sort of custom where you get paid less money if you offend them. And so basically the Guardians are annoyed at Rocket now because they end up walking away with less payment than what they thought they were going to get for doing this particular job. They get on board their ship and they leave. What they don't know is that someone has planted some batteries on board their ship. So someone has taken some of the Annulix batteries and they have planted them on board the Guardians of the Galaxy ship. And the Guardians of the Galaxy are flying off into the distance, and as they've left, they're out in the galaxy now, heading to wherever it is their next adventure is taking them. They discover the batteries on board their ship, and everyone in the Guardians is now angry at Rocket because they believe that he's lied to them and that he's actually done the thing he said he wouldn't do. So not only has he cost them money, he's now stolen batteries that he said he wouldn't do, and they're really angry and upset at him. Now he's angry and hurt because he didn't do it. The batteries were planted on the ship, and so he tries to defend himself, but they won't listen, they won't believe him, and he gets really hurt by the fact that they won't trust him. And this basically causes Rocket, this is where his sort of character arc in the story starts to come into play. He now starts to question whether he even really fits in with the rest of the team because they just don't trust him. And nothing he can say can convince them otherwise that he is totally innocent of this, and he's really angry, and he puts that all on them. As this is sort of unfolding, it all happens sort of relatively quickly. All of a sudden, the Sovereigns and their drones, their attack ships that we saw in the first film, they turn up and they start chasing the Guardians because they're angry now and they want those batteries back. Now, obviously, a battle ensues and they end up in the asteroid field. But this time, unlike the first film, the Guardians don't fly through the asteroid field. They hide behind one of the bigger asteroids and wait. And the Sovereigns put all their drones around the outside of the asteroid field waiting for them to come out. So now they're trapped. They can't go anywhere else. And while they're hiding in the asteroid belt, they're totally surrounded. There's nowhere else to go. They start thinking up on the spot some quick escape plans, and all of them are very risky and dangerous. And they're just about to execute one of them. And basically, we get the feeling that no matter which plan they went with, they would never get out of this. So just as they're about to execute this risky plan to try and escape, Ego turns up. And Ego arrives. He destroys the Sovereign drones, and he saves the day. He meets them on board the ship. He convinces Peter, he tells Peter that he's his father and that he's been looking for him and that he should come with him. He needs to show him his home planet and tell him about his heritage. Now, Rocket is highly suspicious because he doesn't think that this is adding up, and he obviously is a suspicious character by nature. He doesn't think that Peter and the rest of the team should trust Ego. But the rest of the crew are angry at Rocket because they still think that he stole the batteries and he's put them in this predicament. And so they say to him that he's got to stay behind. Peter basically says, look, you've got to stay behind and look after and repair the damaged ship. Basically, you need to think about what you've done because, it's your fault we're in this mess, rah-de-rah-de-rah. And now you're just angry and jealous of me because I'm starting to find some success and fulfillment in my life. I found my father and you're upset and jealous about that. So off they go. Peter and the rest of the crew go on board Ego's ship, head to Ego's planet, and when they arrive on the planet, Ego welcomes them. We see some of those same sort of things, same beats that we saw in the original film or the current film. And Peter is told about how Ego fell in love with his mother. He starts to tell that story. Meanwhile, we go back to the ship. Rocket is now becoming really angry. He's angry about not being trusted. He's angry about the fact that he's been left behind to babysit the ship. He really feels that he doesn't fit in. He's sort of, because he's on his own, he's just multiplying it all in his head, making it worse and worse, and he's really angry now. And he decides that he's going to, to heck with these guys. He's going to get in the ship and he is going to head to the nearest saloon planet, and he's going to drink and gamble his sorrows away. Back on Ego's planet, the team is now some of the team is starting to become suspicious about what's really going on, just sort of like the original film. and they're not sure. But Peter won't listen to their comments because he's so happy and overjoyed to have finally found his father. Ego tells Peter that basically he had come to Earth to retrieve him after Peter's mother had died, but when Ego arrived, Peter was gone, and he had no way of tracking him down, and so he was heartbroken. And then he has recently begun to hear stories about this hero called Star-Lord, who saved the galaxy with his band of merry rogues, the Guardians of the Galaxy. And this guy Star-Lord is a celestial human hybrid. And basically Ego tells him that he realised there could only be one celestial human hybrid out there, and that has to be his son. And then with tears in his eyes, he basically tells them how fate has caused them to cross paths in this asteroid field close to his home planet, and how this is all just meant to be. Peter begins to open up to Ego. We take a little bit more time than that with this, really build this sort of up, but Peter opens up to Ego and in their discussions over the sort of, I guess, days, and he tells him about the serious regrets he has about the passing of his mother, and how Peter tells him that he wishes that he had told his mother that he loved her and said goodbye to her this one last time. He tells about how he ran off as a little boy, and he still has huge regret and very major sadness in his life about that moment. And then Ego says, well, it's funny you should say that, because he says he actually has the power to send him back in time briefly into his body as that young boy at his mother's deathbed, and he will be able to say a proper goodbye to his mother. In fact, he will have an hour. He'll have that final hour. That's all he can give him with this power that he has. He can go back in time, spend an hour with his mother as a little boy. He can tell her that he loves her. He can say his goodbyes. He can build up an hour of really good memories with him and his mother. And then he will be brought back into his current body, back on the planet. And he will have this as a memory, and obviously his mother would have known this, and basically it all would have happened. It's like a time-traveling type thing. But there's a catch. In order to do this, you need two celestials, and they must exercise their power together. And not only that, but this has to happen in conjunction with a particular natural event, some sort of cosmic event, an eclipse or an aligning of the planets or something, which will maximize their celestial abilities. And it just so happens that there is one coming up. And so he says this is an opportunity for the two of them to work together so they can right this wrong. Meanwhile, Rocket is now on this saloon planet. He is drinking his sorrows away in a bar somewhere, some decrepit old space bar. And outside, it's that same planet we saw with Yondu when he crossed paths with the car. So we see that same scene unravel with Sylvester Stallone, and they talk about how they booted him out of the Ravagers because he kidnapped a child, and he, even though he tries to give him a drink and start up a conversation, they don't want to have anything to do with him, just like we saw in the current film. And then basically Yondu wanders into the bar. He's upset, he's angry, he's sad, and he decides that he's going to start drinking his sorrows away too. And then he spies a drunken Rocket making noise at the bar, and they start up a conversation. And Rocket begins to tell Yondu about what has happened, how Peter and the rest of the Guardians have gone off with Ego, and he says basically they can all go to hell. Again, this is like his former sort of emotional defense that we saw in the first film really kicking into high gear. The reason he's caustic with people, the reason he insults other people is because he doesn't really trust them enough, and he doesn't want to let people in. He doesn't want to let his guard down. So here he is putting his guard back up again, and he sort of feels like maybe he's been proven right, that he should have never trusted the Guardians in the first place, because if you trust people, they'll always let you down. Anyway, so he's in this drunken rant, and in the rant, he mentions Ego. He mentions the name Ego, and Yondu stops him and says, Ego, you said Ego. What did you mean when you said Ego? And he tells him about Ego, and he tells him that he's Peter's father, that Peter has found his father. But Yondu is totally shocked by this, and then he begins to tell him a different story. And he says to Rocket that in actual fact, Ego is not Peter's father at all. Yondu explains that years ago, Peter's real father had crash-landed on Ego's planet while running from some trouble, and that he had confided in Ego about his son stuck on Earth and how he was desperate to get back to him. And anyway, while he was on Ego's planet, Ego had helped him to repair his ship, and they sort of built up a rapport. And then Ego realizes that Peter is exactly what he needs to become all-powerful. He is a celestial human hybrid, and that's what Ego needs. Ego needs someone who isn't just a celestial like him. So he can't use Peter's father, who is just a celestial. He needs a celestial human hybrid for some reason, something to do with human DNA to complete his power trip and his taking over the whole entire universe. So what he does is Ego convinces Peter's dad that he should go back to Earth, collect his son, and then come back to this planet and make it his home. And he will live trouble-free. All of the hassles he's had, all of the people that are chasing him, they'll never be able to find him. Ego will keep him safe, and him and his son can live a happy and fulfilled and peaceful life together away from all the trouble. Anyway, as he's leaving the planet, though, in this ship to go and collect his son, Peter's father encounters Mantis, and Mantis now has begun to feel sorry for him, just like in the current film where she's a good person at heart. And she implants a strong sense of suspicion, a strong sense about what is really going on. And so he knows, Peter's dad realizes that because of what Mantis does, that the entire galaxy will be in danger if Peter falls into Ego's hands, and he realizes he can never, ever go back there. He leaves the planet without saying anything more. He realizes, I can't go back. And so he knows he's in great danger. He knows that he's been lied to. He knows that that in actual fact, Ego needs his son to take over the universe. He doesn't know all the specifics, but he knows that's what's happening. And what happens is he encounters, or he goes to seek out Yondu. Now, he's known Yondu. Peter's dad has known Yondu, it turns out, for a long time. And in actual fact, Peter's dad had saved Yondu's life, and so Yondu owed him the greatest debt of all. He owed him his very life. And basically what Peter's dad convinces Yondu of is he says, look, here's the deal. I need you as part of this plan. I can't go back and collect my son myself. I'm suspicious that he's going to track me there or something like that. So what I want you to do is I want you to go and collect Peter. He doesn't know you. Go and collect Peter from planet Earth, and we will meet up at a rendezvous point, and basically if I don't meet you there and by a certain time, then you've just got to go, you've got to leave, and you must keep Peter safe, and you must never tell Peter or anyone else about why you have Peter. You can't tell him about Ego. You can't tell him why you've got him. You must keep it a secret, because I don't want Ego to ever find out. And if anybody knows, someone will say something over a beer or one too many beers one night, and the secret will get out, and Ego will know how to track him down. And I don't want Peter to be curious about Ego, and I don't want him to go back to the planet. So you must never ever tell him or anybody else. And he says, if you do this for me, all your debts are forgiven. And so now all of a sudden, we now have this Yondu-Peter connection, which is a far more emotionally resonating connection. Because now we realise that Yondu is actually the protector of Peter. He's not a kidnapper at all. Everyone else who thinks he's a kidnapper has it totally wrong. And now all of a sudden you realise that this whole thing with Stakar and him being kicked out of the Ravagers, he's really been done an injustice here, and Yondu is actually not a bad guy. He's a pirate, he's a rogue, but he actually has like a heart of gold underneath it all, and he's actually doing the right thing, even though it will cost him. He could tell people what's really going on, but he chooses to keep it a secret because he has committed himself to saving Peter and keeping him safe. And so it really becomes sort of quite a heroic thing, and you realise now there's a whole big emotional connection and resonance between Peter and Yondu, and with this whole being kicked out of the Ravagers thing, that just takes on a whole new dimension. Of course, Peter's father had never arrived, and so Yondu assumes he's been killed. We don't know whatever happened to him, and he flees with Peter, because basically the plan was he was going to go in one direction, and while Yondu was getting his son from Earth, he was going to destroy the spaceship, because he thought that Ego might have been tracking it, and they were going to meet up and then go off on their merry way. But of course, his dad never shows up. Now, and this obviously causes the situation where Yondu is kicked out of the Ravagers. Now, we never find out what happened to Peter's father. We just don't know. It's just left open-ended. Yondu then convinces Rocket that they've got to go back and they've got to save Peter. And he basically says, look, I haven't sacrificed everything for this boy Peter for no reason. Basically, I committed myself to saving this guy and keeping him safe. And especially after the encounter he's had outside the bar with the other Ravagers, where they still hate him, he says, this has got to count for something. We've got to go and save him. And, of course, Rocket's a little bit hesitant at first, but but he sort of convinces him, and Rocket basically pretends that he's only really doing it because he wants to get the credit for saving the galaxy all by himself, and he wants to prove to the world that he is actually the most important Guardian of them all. He's going to show them, they don't trust him, but in actual fact, he's the most important member of the team, sort of thing. And so he agrees to go with them, and Yondu basically leaves his crew on that planet. They don't go with him. He tells them that he'll be back, that he has a mission, he has to do this one thing, and then he'll be back later. And he tells Kraglin that he's to look after the crew in his absence, and that if he doesn't return, Kraglin is now the new captain. Meanwhile, back on the planet, back on Ego's planet, things are starting to come unravelled. And what I would have is lots of environmental metaphors happening in this film as well. So as the time of this cosmic event draws closer, perhaps the film starts and it's a nice, sunny, bright environment on the planet, and there's some sort of perpetual sunset that starts happening, and there's cosmic storms. There's lots of basically signs and symbols in the actual cinematography which tells you a storm is brewing, an event is coming. Okay, so it indicates perhaps something's not so good here. We're moving towards something. The story is moving forward. Anyway, similar to the first movie now, obviously the suspicions of the rest of the Guardians have really started to escalate. And similar to the first movie, Mantis sees them as good people, and so she tells them what's really going on. She tells them that Ego is not Peter's father, and that he's limited in how far he can travel from the planet because it's his source of life-giving energy. So he can travel a short distance, but not a long distance. So he can go to nearby planets, but he can't go further than that. And she tells them that and this, by the way, would explain why he couldn't go to Earth and just, kill Peter's dad and go and collect Peter himself, because he couldn't get there. She then tells him that if Peter participates in this plan, that he's not going to go back in time. He will not be a little boy and spend an hour with his mother. All of that's a lie. That is totally impossible, and Ego can't do that. Instead, what will be happening is that he will be granting unlimited power to Ego, and that Peter will be killed in the process. Ego will become the most powerful being in the universe. He will take over the universe, which he wants to do, and Peter will be destroyed in the process. And he will be able to rule the entire universe and roam at will wherever he wants, basically. Now, just as she is finishing up telling them the truth, Ego walks in on this with Peter. Now, the Guardians immediately try to convince him of what is going on, but Ego, in turn, tries to convince Peter that Mantis is lying. He's not psychopathic, he's not angry, he's very magnanimous, he's trying to play the martyr here. And so basically he says Mantis is lying because she's jealous. Before, when it was just her and Ego, Ego was like a father to her, and now she doesn't want Peter on the scene because she's jealous of how that will destroy their relationship, and she thinks she's entitled to be his daughter, and she doesn't want his real son on the scene. Peter is now desperate and confused. He wants to believe Ego. There's no indication he shouldn't believe him, and he wants to see his mother one last time. He's really desperate. And he doesn't know Mantis well enough to know what is true and what is not. Ego then tells Peter something that only his father could possibly know about him or about his family relationships, or something to do with him and his mother, or about his home or something like that. And he has knowledge that he couldn't have unless he was his real dad. And he then tells him about Mantis and her ability to make people feel a certain way, and that in her jealousy, even though he forgives her for doing it, she could have tricked his friends by using her powers to deceive them because she's just so jealous. Ego then begins to fake sadness. Once again, he's playing the martyr. He's really faking sadness about this and about the whole situation. He pretends, though, that he's willing for them to leave anytime they like, that he will obviously be very heartbroken. It will destroy him as a dad, but he loves them too much to force them to do anything against his will. And he says, you can take my ship and you can leave any time you like. Once again, pretending to be very magnanimous here. He tells them that if they leave, Peter will never have the chance to say goodbye to his mother, but he's not going to force him to do anything he doesn't want to. And in this desperation now, Peter says, okay, I'm going to stay. And he chooses to stay with Ego and carry out the original plan. But the other Guardians don't want that to happen. They're desperate. And so they try and overpower Ego in order to basically, effectively, take Peter by force off the planet and save him. But Ego doesn't fight back. He pretends that he's powerless. He pretends he's a martyr. He's quite badly hurt in the scuffle. And as he's hurt and wounded, he whispers and looks at Peter with desperation, and he whispers, "I love you, son, I love you. I forgive you, I forgive them for whatever happens, I love you." Now Peter is really conflicted, and in this instant, he finally intervenes and he saves Ego. He basically knocks one of the Guardians out, puts the others in chains, he locks them away basically in the castle, in Ego's palace, and then he takes Ego and they go together to the place where this time shift is supposed to happen. Now, not long after this, Rocket and Yondu arrive on the planet and they find the others locked in the castle. They free them. Mantis shows them on a map exactly where Peter and Ego have gone, and she explains that Ego can only be defeated if his brain is destroyed, but that can only happen when he's vulnerable and distracted, and that means they have to let this cosmic event and this whole process actually start with Peter caught up in it, and only then will he be weak enough and distracted enough for them to actually destroy his brain. If they try before the process has started, he will know and he will destroy them. If they try afterwards, he will be too powerful and they will be destroyed. So that's the only way to save Peter. Meanwhile, back out at the spot where this event is going to unfold, Peter has come to realise that Ego is not telling the truth. And what I was thinking is perhaps there's something he says which betrays the fact that he doesn't really have knowledge about his mother at all. He says something about Peter or his family situation that all of a sudden doesn't make any sense at all. There's something he should know that he doesn't maybe, but Peter knows for certain that he's lying to him. But Ego traps him, similar to what we saw in the current film, those cosmic radiation, those sort of laser type tentacle things, and he grabs him. And he begins to initiate the process of using him to become all powerful. And basically he tells Peter that what's going to happen is that he's going to transplant himself into Peter's body. He needs the human celestial hybrid. It will kill Peter in the process. It'll make Ego all powerful, and he will no longer be limited by his current form. Ego also confesses to him that he set up the whole battery saving mission with the Sovereigns. He had promised them some sort of power or technology that he had, so that no more attacks would ever be able to be perpetrated against their batteries. So basically, it was an offer they couldn't refuse. And he says, all you have to do is hire the Guardians of the Galaxy and get them to do this mission. And if you do that, I'll give you the technology. And so they do that. They hire the Guardians. But what Ego also did was he paid someone who works for, or who's part of the Sovereign community. He finds someone who's greedy in a bar and he paid them money to plant the batteries on the Guardians ship. So the Sovereigns don't know. They think the Guardians have stolen from them. The Guardians don't know. The whole thing's been a setup, and there's really only one way they could chase them, and that was towards that asteroid field close to his planet. Now, in the meantime, what happens is the Guardians arrive in a ship, and they're sort of on the outskirts, hidden away there, but where this whole event is starting to happen. And they formulate a plan where Drax, Groot, Rocket, and Mantis will go off in one direction and they will create a diversion, while Yondu and Gamora will go in the other direction and they will save Peter and destroy Ego. And then they'll meet up at the end and leave the planet. Now, anyway, the battle starts to ensue, some of the similar sort of beats that we saw in the current film, but Rocket is badly hurt in the battle and Gamora has to go and save him. They've only got one ship left now, and she has to leave saving Peter to go and save Rocket. And she makes that choice to go and save Rocket and leave Yondu. And Yondu says he will do whatever it takes. And she says, but you don't have a ship, how will you do this? And he says, I will do whatever it takes. And he's willing to sacrifice himself to save Peter and destroy Ego. The final confrontation between Ego and Yondu involves Yondu distracting Ego and then using his flying arrow to pierce his brain while he is distracted, while this cosmic energy transfer is taking place. That kills Ego, it destroys his brain, it releases Peter from this powerful grasp, but here's the important bit, it also causes a massive burst of cosmic radiation. Peter is immune to it, he's a celestial, it doesn't hurt him at all, but Yondu is not, and it fatally affects him. Basically, he's now poisoned with cosmic radiation. He is dying. The planet around them is now starting to decay, now that Ego is obviously dead, and Peter is there. He's saved, but he's holding the dying Yondu in his arms, and Yondu tells him the real story about what's gone on, and they're now waiting for Gamora to return with the ship so they can take off and go. But Yondu is dying, and he tells him the truth about his father. He explains that he had lied to him all these years to keep him safe from Ego, and that he had come to love him as a son, that he'd never thought, at first he wanted him just to break into these small places, but then he'd come to love him as a son. Yondu dies just as Gamora returns with the ship to take them all off the dying planet. So they take Yondu back to his crew on the saloon planet where they were drinking before, and of course the other Ravagers find out and they give him a full Ravager funeral. After this, or close to this, Peter comes and sits with a wounded Rocket, and he apologizes for thinking and treating him like he had stolen the Anulax batteries. And Rocket sort of jokes with him again, that defensive mechanism he's got. He jokes with him that, you weren't half wrong. I was going to steal the batteries anyway, but I couldn't figure out a way to do it, so I never stole them. So he's trying to put up that sort of hard man front, but really, there's sort of a reunion there and a redemption for both of them, Rocket tells Peter that he has realised that he was wrong to think that he wasn't part of the Guardians family, because he actually understands that Gamora made a huge sacrifice by choosing to leave Peter and come and save him. She chose Rocket over Peter, and he realises how big a sacrifice that was because of her feelings for Peter. And of course, there's plenty of jokes about how they're not really in love. Cue all those same sort of jokes. What do you mean? No, we don't really love each other. But, obviously Rocket knows this. We all know that, okay? And we understand that Rocket really is valuable, and he understands that too. The movie comes to an end with basically Peter sitting with Gamora in the cockpit of the ship. The others are in the loading bay, the cargo bay, loading up with supplies as they prepare to fly off into the sunset. And he tells her that he realizes that his desire for the past and for healing and for his family had basically put him in a situation where he was willing to compromise the entire universe in order to get what he wanted and to satisfy his emotional longings, and he realises that wasn't a good thing. And he talks about how he was a little boy, and he realised through this incident that he needs to start growing up, that he can't still be that little boy. He's trapped like a little boy would, where a little boy thinks with his emotions and doesn't really think things through and doesn't really listen to the people who love him the most. They just act on instinct and emotion and urge. And so there's sort of a bit of character development there. The end credit scene would be, one of the end credit scenes at least, would be the Sovereigns with that sarcophagus and creating that new creature, whatever it's going to be. And so the reason for that is that, remember, that they don't know the truth about the fact that the Guardians was set up. And as far as they're concerned, the Guardians stole their batteries and got away with it. They never got justice for that. And so they're still really angry. And this starts a permanent grudge with the Guardians. And effectively, it creates a scenario you can come back to in future movies. So, how is this version of Guardians of the Galaxy 2 better than the one that we got? Well, here's what I think. I think the whole issue of fatherhood and family longing is dealt with at a much deeper level, I think, than the current film. At times it feels like a bit of a cliched trope in the current film. This one's a bit deeper. I think the story is much tighter in my version. There's no Nebula at all. Maybe you could use her in a future movie, but she doesn't need to be in this. It's just, to me, it's a whole distraction that pads out the movie unnecessarily. There's no Yondu crew betrayal. I don't think you need that whole Yondu thing where his crew betray him. Once again, it's just adding an extra meat that you don't really need. There's no Sovereign final battle, and it sort of makes sense of them being really angry with the Guardians of the Galaxy because they never actually got justice or revenge for what happened to them. And also it leaves them open to come back in a third and final film to complete a really tight trilogy there. Yondu's sacrifice, this is really important, Yondu's sacrifice is now actually earned. And I think it's stronger because of that. It's far more emotionally resonant. You realise that he has sacrificed so much for Peter, and so when he sacrifices his very life, it actually means something. There's a real connection between the two of them. It's not just stated. You really get the emotional depth of this. It's much more emotionally resonant. And it also kind of makes sense of some of the other things we saw in the first film. Like at the end of that first film where Yondu realises that Peter has actually taken off with the Infinity Stone, and not given it to him, he's got that big, proud sort of smile on his face, and it doesn't really make sense unless, of course, he actually loves Peter like a son, and he's kind of proud of his son for doing the right thing. It kind of all makes sense now. There is no spacesuit flying into the atmosphere, sticking on a suit, saving Peter scene. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, when I was watching that in the film, it just didn't make sense. I was like, they've got so much time here in the upper atmosphere, and there's no major threat here. Why are the other Guardians not back here with the ship saving them? It just didn't make a lot of sense to me. And also, we've already seen in Guardians of the Galaxy 1 that characters can survive out in space for a reasonable period of time without any breathing or spacesuit apparatus. So why did Yondu die so quickly? So you don't even have to deal with that. It's just not even in this issue. It doesn't even come up at all as an issue. You have his death taking place in another way, and you still manage to satisfy all the things that you need. Like you need to get his body back at the end so he can have a funeral, etc. Peter Quill has experienced a character arc in my version of the film. He doesn't really go on much of a character journey, I don't think, in the current version. And there's also been some very important character development. He's now starting to mature. He's still himself, but he's starting to grow up just that little bit, right? So there's character development. My version leaves open the possibility of a really solid and a big crescendo for a final trilogy film, where basically Peter goes searching for his real father. And also, you've got that whole thing with the sovereigns who are still unsatisfied, and so they could be brought into it, and they could, come into this film, and once again, it could lead to a massive final battle and a much more, I think, rewarding version of Peter's father. Having Ego, the planet, as Peter's father, combining those two different characters into one, I think was a big mistake, and it really let the property, the whole Guardians of the Galaxy property, down, I think, in a big way. It doesn't make Peter's character look good. It's not a very satisfying story conclusion for that whole fatherhood thing that was going on in Peter's life. It just for me, it felt really horrible. And lastly, there has been a major development of the whole Guardians of the Galaxy team. The whole property has developed, and we can get plenty of jokes at the end about the fact that they're no longer Guardians of the Galaxy, they are now Guardians of the Universe, because they've saved the whole universe from this evil, maniacal Ego character. And again, once again, it's a bit lighter. There's no child sacrifice and child mutilation and stuff going on in my movie either. It's not even talked about. It's a more lighter movie. And there'd be a few less jokes about genitals and stuff like that as well. But it would still be lighter. It would still have those jokes where they need to be. It just wouldn't be lots of padding out and pointless insertion of jokes that really slow all the action down. I think overall it'd probably be a shorter film, but I think it would be much tighter. It would be a more rewarding story, and it would set up a sequel that you're actually now looking forward to. And it would give them good impetus going into the Infinity Wars. They're a bit more powerful, they're a bit more together as a team. It really is building towards that as well. So there's lots of wins out of making my version of the film, I think. There you go. That's my version of it. I'm not a screenwriter. It's just the broad brush strokes. There's plenty of little things that would need to be filled in, but I'd love to know what you think. Do you think my version is a better version of Guardians of the Galaxy 2? Do you think there are things that I missed or I got wrong? Do you think there are things I could improve? I would love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments section below. Otherwise, I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media. Thanks for watching.